Welcome to Microsoft Excel 2019, Lesson 3 by Megan Reese. In this lesson, we're going to be learning about graphs and charts, all the different ways you can graph. In fact, you're going to be making 31 different graphs in this assignment. It's a lot. And that is part of the reason why it's been broken into two pieces. It's actually not a giant, huge, long assignment, so don't be freaked out that it has two parts to it. But part of the reason that I did that is because all of these images that are getting pulled in, so when you make a chart, it just pulls it in automatically. They take up a lot of RAM. They make your computer a little slow if you have too many. So I found that when I had it all in one piece, it was just too big. So that's why it's in two pieces. Just so don't let that freak you out. So go ahead and make sure that you are in the part one and know that it is all going to come in automatically. So as you create the chart, it's really important that you put it in the box. So this is going to be the box for chart A1, and then when you come over to your cover sheet, it will appear automatically over here so that you'll be collecting all the graphs that you make, and then you can print part one and then part two. Your teacher may want to grade that separately, but as two different assignments, but really it is all just one big assignment. So there's part A, part B, part C, and then the final application. So let's go ahead and get started with the first type of charts, which is a pie chart. And I'm going to be able to get through this entire lesson probably with just one set of data. You'll be making lots of charts because practice is good. But we're just going to go ahead and get started with the pie chart. So first of all, the basic of making a chart is highlight the information you want to make. You want to graph, which amazingly how much kids forget that step. Okay, if you just go to insert and do a chart, you haven't highlighted anything, you're going to get a blank chart. Okay, so make sure you highlight what you want to graph, then go to insert and choose your graph type and click on it, and it will make your graph. Very basic. Okay, the hardest thing about making graph is actually setting up the data. I don't make you do that in this lesson. You'll be doing that in the advanced lessons. I've set the data up for you. Actually making a graph is not all that difficult. However, now that you know how to make a graph, you could have just gone ahead and made the first graph just now. But there's an issue with that. If you look at it, it only graphed quarter one. So I highlighted all this information, but it didn't graph 4, 3, 2, 1. It only graphed this. Okay. Even though it says it graphed everything. Notice when I click on the graph, it shows me everything that's included in the graph, but it didn't. The reason for that is that this is a pie chart. So in every one of these lessons, the parts of this lessons, A, B, and C, it's going to go over different types of graph and then explain why you would use that graph over a different graph. And that's really what the entire application is about. So make sure you're paying attention to that, because the application is going to be like, here's some data, pick a graph type. So you kind of got to know what graph is best for what kind of data. Pie charts are probably the easiest one to figure out because they're actually very restrictive. First of all, pie charts can only graph one set of data. Okay, if I were to graph this with a bar chart, for example, no problem, right? It's going to graph them all. Okay, but a pie chart can't handle that. It can only do one set of data. So even if you give it too much data, it will just default to the first set of data. So that's its first issue. In your assignment, I believe I tell you to highlight that I want this, but I don't want quarter one. I want a different quarter. Or I want a different set. So in order to do that, you're going to hold down the control key, and then you can click on a different set of data. So I can choose to only do quarter four. So the control key allows me to do that. I'm going to go to insert, do my chart. There it is. And I'm okay that it's quarter four, because that's just, I chose this type of graph. Okay, so quarter four, I don't even know, sales results or something. Okay, so now I've got my basic chart. Okay, the next thing you have to know about pie charts, and this is also very restricting, is in order for it to be a true pie chart, like what it really is supposed to show, pie charts are supposed to show percentages. So that means it needs to be part of the whole. Meaning that if I added up all these numbers, okay, let's say I sum those up, is this the total sales for everything in quarter one? If so, then a pie chart is a good idea. If it's not, if I just hand-picked 5 of my salesmen and I have 10 other salesmen, you could still use a pie chart, but it's not really a pure pie chart because a pie chart is supposed to show a percentage of what you're saying. You could say it's a percentage of the highest, I guess, but it's just supposed to show that there was this many sales and this is the percentage of how it's broken down. So it's a part of the whole. If you're like, oh, let's look at the top 10 highest paid actors, pie chart's probably not the bestest decision because the whole pie isn't showing all actors and what they got paid and what percentage each actor has. A pie chart would not be great for that. Yes, you could make one. It just wouldn't be as good as it wouldn't be as effective as a bar chart. So it needs to be a part of a whole. If I can add all these numbers together and it equals the total amount that I'm graphing, then I want to use a pie chart. Okay, it's kind of a trickier one to get. So in your assignment, it will ask you to select. There's 2 sets of data. You need to look at that data and decide which one you should be graphing based on that. Which one is part of the whole and which one of those is just like a top 10 or something. So I'm not going to show you how to do that. That's the same type of graph. It's nothing new. You just need to pick that. All right, the third thing that you need to know about pie charts is the multiple data points. This looks good because there aren't that many pieces. If you have a lot of data points, let's say I have 50 different salesmen in here, and I wanted to graph it, I'm like, oh, I got to do part of the whole, so I'm going to do all my salesmen, and I have 50 salesmen. Now a pie chart's still not going to work because it's just huge. There's too many pieces. Like every little slice is so tiny that it kind of loses its value. It just looks like a mess. So you'll be making a graph like that as well. I'm not going to demo that. That looks like crap. And it will look like crap. And it's supposed to look like crap because it's got too much data. Okay. So just looking at this over here. Is it this one? No, that's the first one. So look at all this data that you have to graph. Okay. And it's okay for this chart to not look good. The whole point is that it doesn't look good. So you're like, oh, okay, that's not a good idea. Okay, our next type is, we're going to be going into some different features in a graph. So this is once you've made the graph, what are some things you can do to make it look better? Okay, and the first one is titles, and I don't know if you noticed I just did it without thinking. I didn't technically teach it, but when you make a graph, I'm just going to remake this graph again, it's not always going to give you a title. Okay, so I go ahead and I type this in, and it just did Q1. It will usually do whatever's up here. So if I highlighted just this information and I didn't give it this title, or this, the title up there, it would still graph it, but it wouldn't give it a title. So, make sure when you move stuff, by the way, that you don't do what I just did. You can make a big mess of your graph. Make sure you click on the white area. I just did Control Z to go back. When you want to move your graph, click on the white area. Okay, so it's just going to give it that name. So if you want to give it a new title, you would just type in, quarter sales or something. I get really annoyed when I see graphs turned in without titles because, like, what's the point of that? If someone saw the graph, like, Q1, what does that even mean? That doesn't tell me anything. You got to at least give some context of what the graph is for. And it would be better if I said quarter sales for and then put the company name or something. Now, sometimes you'll make a graph and for some reason there's no title and you lose the title. You don't have a title. That happens all the time. Fastest way to add a title is click on this little plus button. Okay, this will give you it's a shortcut for the 3 most common things you're going to add, which are chart titles, data labels, and legends. And we'll talk about the other 2 in a little bit. So I can just check the box and add a title if for some reason I lose my title. If you turn in any charts out of the 31 and one of them doesn't have a title, out of the 31 title, you won't get a 4. You won't get a perfect score. Okay, make sure there's a title on every single graph you turn in. Even if it doesn't tell you to put a title in, always put a title in. All right, so as you're creating graphs, the chart tools is right here. If you ever get off of it and you can't see your chart tools, you can click on the graph and it should be right there. There's your chart tools right there. Okay, so with your chart tools, the next thing, we learned about adding a title, which, by the way, you can also do over here, chart title. This has just got a little bit more details, but it does pretty much the same thing this does. This just has a little bit more to choose from. So that's kind of the thing we just did. Now we're going to go ahead and look at layout. This is pretty important. I'm always surprised how many kids completely forget about this when I give them a test on this. But layout is just what I want my graph to basically look like. I mean, it's basically a shortcut. You could go in here and choose a layout, like pick individually exactly what you want. But the quick layout is just that. It gives you a very quick layout of different things you can do, and then you can alter it from there. So you pick whatever closest to what you want. So, like, for example, most of the time I'm going to say get a graph that has percentages. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of a pie chart, is to show you the percent. The other graphs don't necessarily do that unless you tell it to. So you really want it to have the percentages. So now I know that, wow, looking at that, okay, Garland had the highest percentage. The whole point of a graph is to make data more clear. This is boring to look at. Nobody wants to look at this. It's just a bunch of numbers. People look at it and their eyes glaze over. It looks like math, But when you have a graph, you can be like, oh, okay, well, now I know exactly who made the most money. It just makes it a little easier to look at. So you can choose, it probably will tell you what layout. Now, here's another concept that's really important that you get, especially if you're going to take the MOS test, is it's going to say things like choose layout 8 or choose layout 1. If you hold your cursor over it, it will tell you the number of what that layout is. MOS Test does that all the time if you want to pick a color or anything. We'll talk about that in our future lessons. But so in this lesson, though, often we'll say, you know, choose layout 1 or choose layout 5. And so that's how you know which one to pick, okay? You can also do data labels where you decide how I want my labels to be. Now I can move them individually. I can say, oh, I really want these all outside. And I can pick and drag them and put them where I want. Or I can go to Chart Element, Data Labels, and I can choose one of their options as kind of a starter. So this one, it automatically puts them on the outside. I'm a big fan of data callouts. I think those look kind of cool. So, you know, you can kind of mess around with those. Those are your different kinds of data labels that you can use. Okay, the next thing is how to change the colors of your chart. We won't bother to do this in the majority of the charts that you make, but it's important that you know how to do it. So the easiest way is to pick one of the color palettes that they have. And again, we're going to go back to that. If you put your cursor over it, it will tell you the name. So it actually asks you in the assignment to do color palette, whatever. That's what it's talking about, is one of these, okay? And again, that's the kind of thing they would do in the MOS test. But so you click on that, you can do that. But you might not want that color scheme. You might want to pick your own color. So what you do is you click on the chart, and right now they're all highlighted. So if I were to pick a color, they're all going to change to the same color. So be careful that you click it and then click again. So the largest piece is the one you have highlighted. Now the quick way is to right click, go to fill, and choose a color. Okay. That's the fast way. Sometimes it's not as fast if you're going to do pictures, which we'll show you in a minute. It actually tends to slow you down, but you can fill it that way, okay? And we'll show you the other way in just a second when we do images, okay? So that's how you can quickly change the color of all the pieces in your chart. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is donut charts. Okay, now I'll tell you, for a long time I didn't think there was any difference between a donut chart and a pie chart, except that a donut chart had a hole in it. You know, because if I highlight this. And I just do a donut chart, it's basically the same chart, it just has a hole in the middle. But actually donut charts have a distinct ability, and that is that they can do multiple sets of data. Okay, and so, you know, it doesn't look fantastic because it's got even 4 levels is probably a little much, but you can change the thickness of that. You can make it look a little bit better. So we haven't done this yet. We're going to do this a lot where we go to Format Data Series. So basically what you do is you right click on the white area, go to Format. It doesn't even matter what it is, Chart Area, whatever you're clicked on, it doesn't matter. Format Data Series, whatever, as long as you open up this sidebar, okay? And there's 3 options here. So one is going to be the color of it, this is going to be the effects of it, and this is going to be like the actual chart stuff. So in this case, I can change the donut hole size and make it bigger, which I think makes the graph a little bit more readable. I can see a little bit more where everything is going, right? All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is styles. Styles, again, they're presets. So when I click on a graph, I can choose any one of these styles to go with it. And it's really just using all of this stuff, okay? But it's, again, it's a preset. It's like, this is a you can come in here and you could say, okay, but I want to add a glow to it, or I think it should have a shadow or something. And you can come in here and change it if you want, but it's kind of nice to just use one of the ones that they have set up for you, okay? So those are styles, and again, these are the same way where if you hold your cursor over it, it will have a number. So in your assignment, it might say, do style 12, do style 9, or something like that, so that you know which type you're going to do. It might also ask you to remove a legend. So just like I can add a legend, I can also get rid of a legend, which is just clicking on it, making sure that the legend is highlighted and pressing delete, and that will get rid of my legend. The last thing in the pie charts is changing the picture. So when you click on one of these and you go to change the color, this is the kind of the shortcut, and you can do it right here, but I find that when you get to pictures, it's kind of obnoxious. It's a little easier to do it over here if you're doing a lot of them. So the fill is going to be filling the piece. The border also is going to be the box around the piece. So if you wanted to make a big black border around it or something, you could. So I'm going to go to picture and go to insert. And then from file, you could do online pictures, but you don't need to for this assignment. And then there's a bunch of files that you have saved in your file that you need to pull in. So I'm just going to grab this because it happened to be sitting there. And then that actually fills that with that picture, okay? So you can insert pictures that are saved. And so in your chapter 3 or in your 3 folder, you're going to see sorry, these are just random pictures I've saved for other things, but In your 3 folder, you're going to see a soda can one that says soda, and then you'll pull that in, and that's what you'll put in there. So it actually fills it with the picture that you want to use. So that's how you can use pictures. We'll use pictures again later, especially when we get to column charts in a few minutes. So that's how you add pictures. That's part A done. Let's go on and move to part B. All right, so in part B, we're going to be talking about column charts, and unlike pie charts, they have really no real restrictions. Pie charts, the reason you see bar charts and column charts the most is because they are the most versatile chart. They can graph pretty much anything. They're almost always the best choice. Even stuff that would work for a line chart, you could also use a bar chart. If it works for a pie chart, you can also use a bar chart. So bars, columns are pretty much the same thing, except one goes horizontal and one goes vertical. So I kind of use them interchangeably. Although there are times when the type of data you have will look better sideways or look better vertical. So you'll be just kind of using those interchangeably in this assignment. So it doesn't really matter what kind of data you have. You can have one set of data, and if you graph that, it looks fine. Okay. You can have multiple sets of data. And notice I'm not graphing the totals, by the way, because if I graph the totals, it would totally change my, see, then the totals are over here. So generally, by the way, if you have totals, don't usually graph those. But anyway, yeah, when I graph those, it looks totally fine. You can also have a lot more data points. If you have, like if we were, I don't think it's in the assignment, but if you were to go back and graph the really crappy graph in the pie charts, that had all the states, it would still be a big chart because it's got a lot of pieces to it, but it would be fine. Like this is probably the only graph. Well, I guess a line chart might work, but not really. But this is probably the only graph that you can use for a lot of different data. Also, this is great for like top 10s, you know, so that would also work as well. Now, one thing you want to recognize with pie chart or with column charts is when I click on it, I have a whole bunch of options in here. Basically, you've got your 2D versions, your 3D versions. But what I want to make sure you get is this, okay? So this is just going to straight up, it's called a clustered column. You might be asked, please make a clustered column chart. It's basically like the standard chart, okay? And this is your clustered bar, okay? Same exact chart, except they're going 2 different ways. This one is a stacked. So basically, it makes like a mini pie chart. So looking at this graph, I can see that Hepburn obviously made the most money, and I can see that she made the most money in quarter 2. That was her, or quarter 3. That was her big month, right? So I can kind of see that by looking at the data. It's like Hepburn has her own little pie chart, and Monroe has their own little pie chart, right? Stacked makes all things equal. It basically turns it into a percentage, and so it doesn't show as easily who made the most money, but it does show you your months a lot easier. And so there's a lot of times a stacked chart is going to work better because you want to make all things equal and then see, okay, who made the highest percentage each month. So that's called a stacked chart, 100%. So this is stacked. This is 100% stacked. So make sure you know the difference in that. That's going to matter in your application. The 100% matters in your application. I'm giving you a huge hint there. Okay, so those are the different types of stack. And it's exactly the same for bar. Okay, so it just depends on which direction you want to go. And notice also with that, when you're going into the chart type, that it changes. I want you to look at your thing over here, okay? So you've got it money on the y-axis. On this one, it's got percentages. So this one's measuring the money. This is saying it equalizes everything by making it a percent. But that really is the big difference, is that it changes it to percentages instead of what the amount, the money or whatever else you were measuring. Okay, so it equalizes it out. And that's another thing also. Know that this is your y-axis, this is your x-axis. That's going to come in handy later, knowing the difference between the two. I would hope by this point you learned that in your math classes anyway. Okay. Now suppose that I wanted this to be in alphabetical order. Right now it's doing them in just random order as I thought of them and typed them in. If I wanted to change the order, I could actually change the information over here. So I would highlight this information, Garland and all this, and I'm going to go to data, and I'm going to go to sort A through Z, or I could do this sort if it's something else I want to graph it by. But now it's graphed in alphabetical order. And in this particular case, for this particular information, that's really the only way to graph it that makes any sense. But in other cases, you might want to graph it by the other side. So I just copied and pasted over this data. This is from part A that you guys use to do your pie chart. And let's go ahead and graph this as a bar chart. So it is still a very big chart. See how giant that is? It's still very big. And I know that when I have that many data points, but it's still doable. I do need to make it a little bigger so I can see all the states. I have to keep making it bigger till all the states populate. So there they all are. But it's a very messy graph because it's like all over the place. So this is a better example. Like right now it's graphed by, this information is sorted by the name of the state. But it would make more sense if I sorted it by per pupil spending. So I'm going to go into data and I'm going to sort it by the second set of data. And now it makes a lot of sense. Now it tells me, okay, New York above and beyond spends more money per pupil spending in their schools. And Utah, my state, incidentally, it's at the very, very bottom, right? And it just kind of shows which states are spending more money on education than the others, or just who has, in Utah's case, just has a ton of kids. All right. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is stacking and scaling. So this is kind of cool. This is when you make what's basically called a pictogram, where you put an image in. You've probably seen this in like your history books. They do this. So I have some information. I'm going to go ahead and make a graph out of it. And I got to decide, when you're doing a pictogram, sometimes you want to decide which is going to look better sideways or straight up, okay? And in your case, I'm doing a bar chart in your assignment, so we'll just do a bar chart for this one. And then basically you're going to add pictures inside here. So I'm going to click on individually which one I want, and I'm going to go to Picture, Texture, Fill, and I'm going to go to Insert. Now you're going to go to your file and get a picture from there. I don't have any pre-save for this, so I'm just going to go to Online Pictures to get one. And I'm going to type in bird, and I get a little picture that I want, and now I have my little picture there. But it's kind of stretched out. Sometimes you might want it stretched out. Another hint for your application. Sometimes the one picture might look really great. In this case, not so much. So I have two choices. I can stack it, or I can stack and scale. Okay. The difference is stacking is it just puts it in order and makes it look good. But stack and scale gives you one image for the number. So I have 18 next to birds. It's going to give me 18 images. And I believe in your first one, you're going to stack and scale. And then the second one, you're going to do the other way around. So it just kind of depends on what looks best. Okay. And then I go to the next one, click on horses. Picture. Again, you will go to from file and get the one from the folder in your part 3. But since I don't have anything pre-saved, I'm just going to go grab a picture from online. Okay, so once I've done all of them, I've got my pictures in. It really would look a lot better if my bars were thicker. So I'm actually going to come over. So I'm going to click on my bars, and they should pop up over here, or you can right click and go to Format Data Series to pull this up. And in the bar section where it's talking about my graph, I can change my gap width. And if I make it smaller, it's going to thicken up those images. Okay, and you still might want to kind of mess with it. You know, it would be better if it's longer or whatever. It just kind of depends on what kind of pictures you have or how big your numbers are. But generally, you're not going to do stack and scale unless you have smaller numbers. Or the other thing you can do with stack and scale, oops, sorry about that, is you can say, okay, but instead of 1 to 1, I could say, instead of units a picture, I could say for every 2, give me 1 picture, you know, and then it's going to be a little less obnoxious, but you probably want to put that somewhere in, you know, in your information that, that you've done that, you know, 1 picture. And you see that sometimes it'll be like for every million, there's 1 picture. So anyway, that's stacking and scaling for both of those sections. All right, next is switching the row and column data. Basically what that does is it flips these. So right now we've got birds on my y-axis, and we've got the number of how many there are in my x-axis. We're going to switch those. So I go to my chart tools, and I just do switch row and column data, and it flips them the other way. So now I've got my numbers down here. Now that can mess things up sometimes. A lot of times you'll lose your title. You're probably going to need a legend now for that. And usually the legend will take the picture on that I've done. You might have to do it again to get that to show up, but it usually will show a little mini picture of what you have over here. So it doesn't always work out. It kind of depends on what kind of data you have, if that's going to be the best option. And in your assignment, like let's go over to this one. Okay, so this is actually a great example. So we've got Crawford Garland. Right now it's measuring it by the name of the salesman, but if I go to chart tools and I push that button, now it's going to go by quarter. And now each of these colors is for each salesman. So now I can look at it and be like, okay, so quarter 2, Hepburn made the most in quarter 2. So just measuring it a different way, it just flips them. And I think there's quite a few graphs you're going to go back and flip after the fact. And, you know, you can always go back and change your gap width too for fun and see, you know, like over here, how would it look if I changed my gap width? You know, kind of cool. But I want to point out that the real distinction here is that switching the row and column data really makes sense mainly when you have more than one set of data. That's why it worked over here, but I don't really have anything to measure over here because I'm only measuring one thing, right? But when I have multiple sets, it makes a lot more sense to switch it. If this were a pie chart, incidentally, and I tried to switch, it doesn't work at all because there's nothing else to measure. So it only works when you're doing this type of chart. I think it also works with a line chart. Okay, and the last thing we're going to really do in this section is pattern fills. So we've done fills with the solid, okay, when you just change an individual color. And then we did fills. We haven't done gradients, actually. We're going to do those next. But picture, texture fills we just did. And then pattern fills, basically you come in here, you choose a pattern, you pick the two colors. Pattern fills can be very hard to look at. I don't use them often, but they can have the right look. I usually try to stick with two similar colors, and then it's not nearly as obnoxious as if you pick like two really obnoxious colors that don't go together. That can be very jarring to the eye to look at something like that. It's just not, that is not pretty. So when you do patterns, try to pick two, you know, relatively similar colors so it doesn't look too crazy. That still looks crazy, but anyway, that's how you add a pattern fill. You can do pattern fills on pie charts and as well. So that's the pattern fill. Okay, so that's part A and part B, and our lesson A and lesson B. That's the end of part 1. So at this point, you should have all your graphs completed when you open up your part 1 section. So I've got it right here. So when you click on your cover sheet, all of them should be finished here and ready to go. And you can either print that now and hold on to it, or however your teacher tells you to turn it in. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to part C, learning about line charts. The biggest thing you have to know about line charts is that they graph change over time. That's the key right there, change over time. If there is time involved, if there are years or months or something, and it's showing how those months and years have changed and developed, then you can use a line chart for that. You can have one set of data or multiple sets of data. So for example, I think in your assignment you have to do both of those. So if you have a full set, insert, here's the line charts. Now some of these are kind of weird. The 100% we don't use very much. I would either stick with this one or this one most of the time, these two. Okay, so I click on that and it shows me on the left is these numbers, which I don't even know what they stand for. I just made them up, but the numbers here, and then here are the dates. Okay, now notice whatever's at the top here is what's going to go here. So you generally want to start with the earliest date to the newest date. And if your data is not doing that, you can always go in and, you know, sort it to make it the right direction. Okay. If you're doing one set of data, in this I have you do an area chart. So an area chart looks like this, and it just basically fills it in. Now, we'll talk about that in a second. So in this case, it doesn't really matter which of these I pick. They look pretty much the same. That's probably not a good idea. And there's 3D as well. I personally don't like the 3D. I think it just makes it look weird. But anyway, that's just a one set of data, and then we did that as an area chart. Okay, but if you have an area chart with multiple data, then it gets a little trickier. Okay, so if I go into insert here and I do an area chart, I have this option and this option. You might say, well, obviously I want to pick the second option because then I can see everything. And that's true, but notice that is a stacked column. That's stacked, okay? And this one makes it 100%, which I actually never use the 100% one. The problem is that the numbers get a little wonky. So notice it says it's up to 120. The numbers over here don't ever go that high. So it can be a little misleading where they are. So in this case, I actually want to do the 2D stacked. And what I'm going to do is let them overlap each other, but I can't see all the different ones. Like I can't even see south at all. It's not even there. So what I do is I'm going to click on the one that's in the front, which is west. And I'm going to come over here to solid fill. and I'm going to make it transparent so that you can see what's behind it. Okay, and I'm going to go to the second one, East. And by the way, you can click on East by itself right here, and that actually does highlight it. And I think I'll do a different color. We'll make this one maybe green, and I'm going to put a transparency on it as well. And you just have to keep putting in transparencies until, except for the last one. Okay, so south doesn't, or north, whichever one's in the back, which I believe is south, that's not going to need a transparency. I would also keep lighter colors so that you can kind of see it. I actually I haven't done it here, but I kind of like it when you do all colors in the same color scheme. I think it looks really nice when they're all, instead of doing a different color, like a dark yellow to a light yellow, I think can look really nice. Okay, and then we'll do our last one, and I'm going to make the south one really a bright color so I can see it, because it's like, which one is south? And like, oh, that one is south. Okay, now I'm getting it. So anyway, that's how you would do one to keep it not stacked, but able to see all the different things. And obviously for one like this, you don't want to have a lot of sets of data. Even 4 was a little much. I think in your example for your assignment, you just have 3. So it's not an area chart, and this type of area chart might not be very good if you're doing a lot of data. Okay, so next we're going to do a line chart where you change the line color. So I'm going to actually just take this chart and use this one because it's pretty much the same thing. You just click on the line that you want to change. You go to the paint bucket and change color. Very straightforward. But this one, I believe I asked you to do one with markers, so I'm going to change that to the one with markers. That's this one. That's the one that has the dots. So now I have dots. And when you change the color, you can choose to change the color of the line and as well as the dots. So to do that right here, see how it says line and here it says marker? And then that allows me to change the fill of the marker. I think in your document, in your assignment, you're supposed to change it to black. And so that's how you would make your markers a little bit different size. And you might even also, on the marker, the markers have an outline, so you might want to change the outline to black as well. Or you could make it the same color that you had, whatever. I think you can change the width as well. I don't know. You can play with all those options and see what they do. Expanding the data means that you add data or take data away from what you did. So when I click on this, it shows all the data that I used for this chart. What it means is that I take this and I go, oh, you know what? Don't include west. And it will take it right out. Or let's say there's a new set of data, like southeast or something. Okay, I'm just gonna put some random numbers in there. Okay, and then I want to add that, so I'm just going to grab this like this, and it will give me a new one. Okay, so now I have a new line that goes with this. So that's how you can expand data or unexpand it, whatever the word is for that. All right, we're going to also talk about adding axis labels. So you can do that here, where you do axis titles, and you put there, or you can do it up here, axis titles. And this one lets me do one or the other, okay, which is kind of cool. It's also could be in your quick layout. They might have axis titles that come with it. So, and I think both your examples, I only want it in the vertical. Sometimes like you don't want it on the bottom because it's kind of obvious that this is time and you're like, do I really need to label that? And if it has both, you can just delete the one that you don't want. But then you can just come over here and say, I don't even know what these numbers mean, so we'll just say sales and out or something, or number of sales or whatever it stands for. Now you kind of saw me do this next one a minute ago where you change the chart type. So if you already have a chart, you can go in and change what kind of chart it is. So you just come over here to your chart tools, go to change chart type, and I could say, oh, I want one without dots, or I would rather this as a column chart or a bar chart or something. And you can actually change the chart type after the fact, and it will just go in and fix it for you. So that is an option as well, as how to change the chart type after you've already made the chart. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is a combination chart, which I kind of snuck in with the line charts, but really it is kind of its own type of chart. I just don't want to go into a ton of detail about it. But basically with the combination charts, you are comparing two unlike sets of data. So in this example, I've got numbers and I've got dollars. And these numbers are very different. These numbers are clearly much higher than these numbers. And if I were to graph that, okay, so I'm just going to come in here and do a column chart here. And the problem here is, you see how number of sales is so small that when we compare them, it just isn't really very effective. Now, in the old days, you had to go in and you can still do this. You can click on sales and then you go to change chart type and you can choose that you want sales to be a different kind of chart. But there is actually in 2019 and 2016 a combination chart button. So you just can click on this one and it will automatically give you the options for combination chart. And clearly the best option for this particular data is this one. Now what it does is it gives you a third axis. Okay, so right here we've got how many sales they had, all the different teams, and then this is how much money they made. So they actually give it a new axis for the other information. And so looking at this, I can see, okay, well, team 4 had a lot of profit, but they sold more. They probably could have charged more for their product, or because they didn't have as much profit as you'd think they would for the number of sales they had, So whereas these two companies had the same number of sales, but these guys made more than these guys did. So they must have had better charge, so it tells you information. All right. So, and you can try switching the row column data, see if that works. Nope. Okay. If it looks super weird. I mean, honestly, it does make a little bit of sense, but that's still kind of an off-putting picture. So it's a good idea to every now and then just change it, see what happens. What happens if I change it on a line chart? Let's see. Yeah, that works okay. Puts north, east, and south down here, and then the numbers over here. But I still think that's a lot harder to understand. But whatever works. Okay, so the next thing is a gradient fill, which we did not do back. Use gradient fills more often with these kind of charts. But what we're going to do for gradient fill is we're going to come over here to our paint bucket, go to gradient, and then you basically have to build your gradient. You just design it. You choose the colors that you want. So let's say I want that color, and I just want 2 colors on mine. Okay, and it might be set this way. Sometimes it's set sideways like that, which isn't as effective depending on which way your graph's going. And so if that's the case, you can change it this way to make it fade up the direction that you want. You can also do them individually. Like I could say, oh, I want this one to be this color. Like team 2 is going to be a different color. Like I can actually go in and design each one to be a different color if I wanted to. So you can do them individually, which incidentally is not something you can do in Google Sheets, which kills me that you can't do that in Google Sheets. Okay, so that is how you add a gradient. I believe in your assignment you'll be going back and adding a gradient to some of the previous graphs that you already created. So make sure you've got part 1 and part 2 both open, because sometimes you go back and change things in part 1, even though you're now in part 2. All right, that completes part 3. And the next part is the application, which I will not be taking you through. That is up to you to go through and make sure you know how to do each chart. Keep in mind, there's a couple of them, like chart 2 has a little hint in there for you that can help you. Sometimes you'll have to click on the chart data. I don't know if you've noticed this so far in your lesson, but anytime I got the data from online and I didn't just make it up, I include a data graph. And you click on that, it will take you to where I got that data. And there are a few times where you actually have to use this data for your assignment. Or it's just there so you know where I got it. I didn't make any of this up except for the ones that are obviously made up like this, right? Once you're done, you'll have your cover sheet and you're going to want to print that. Make sure you've added a header to both. Print them both, the cover sheet for part A or part A1 and part 2. Staple them together and turn them in, and that is all you've got for lesson 3. Good luck, and we will see you for lesson 4 when we start looking at the more intricacies of the stuff we've learned aimed at the MOS test. So we will see you then. Thanks.